Welcome, everyone. Everyone in here, out there, wherever that is. I've been asked to announce that this is being recorded, so watch what you say. We'll begin with chants, and then we'll sit for about 10 minutes, and then the show will begin. So do people have the chants?
Yeah, I'll put them online right now.
Yes. So we'll start with the 7-line prayer.
Good.
3 times. Hum, on the northwest border of the land of Uddiyana, on the pistil of the lotus flowering stem, you attain supreme wondrous city, Uddiyana's Padmakara, surrounded by a retinue of many dakinis. Following you are reach accomplishment. Please come and grant your blessings. Guru Padma City, Om. Om, in the northwest border of the land of Uddiyana, on the pistil of the lotus flower and stem, you attain supreme wondrous city, renowned as Padmakara, surrounded by a retinue of many dakinis. Following you, I reach accomplishment. Please come and grant your blessings. Guru Padma City, Om. Om, in the northwest border of the land of Uddiyana, on the pistil of the lotus flower and stem, you attain supreme wondrous city, renowned as Padmakara, surrounded by a retinue of many dakinis. Following you, I reach accomplishment. Please come and grant your blessings. Guru Padma City, Om. Now the light of blessings. In supreme, unchanging, great bliss, Vajradhatu, forefather who emanates and gathers all kayas and Buddha fields, glorious Rupa, Lord of oceans and Mahakalas, we supplicate the Guru, primordial Buddha. From the wisdom play of all pervasive compassion, you continually appeared as the learned and accomplished charioteers of the teachings of India and Tibet, and especially of the Kagyu and Nyingma. We supplicate you, in particular as the magical emanation of sacred wisdom. Lord, your marvelous virtues of hearing, contemplating, and meditating, manifested for our sake as Buddha activity. Jyoti Gyatso, we supplicate at your feet, actualizing the wisdom of ultimate Dharmata. Confusion exhausted at its base, your spontaneous wisdom came forth. Apparent existence as the one Mangalam Dharmakaya, we supplicate space, Jyoti Gyatso. By the power of birth and death being naturally pure in enlightenment, with the vision of compassion beyond decrease or increase, even looking after us disciples who are left behind, please ripen and free our beings, perfecting the excellent path of the effortless jnana. Glorious Guru, may our minds mix with yours, thoroughly liberated in the youthful boss body endowed with the 6 qualities. May we perfect the 2 benefits. The Sutra of the Heart of Transcendent Knowledge. Thus have I heard once the Blessed One was dwelling in Rajagriha at Cultured Peak Mountain, together with the great gathering of the Sangha of monks and a great gathering of the Sangha of Bodhisattvas. At that time the Blessed One entered the Samadhi that expresses the Dharma, called profound illumination, and at the same time noble Avalokiteshvara, the Bodhisattva Bodhisattva Mahasattva, while practicing the profound Prajnaparamita, saw in this way he saw the five skandhas to be empty of nature. Then through the power of the Buddha, Venerable Shariputra said to noble Avalokiteshvara, the Bodhisattva Mahasattva, how should a son or daughter of noble family train who wishes to practice the profound Prajnaparamita? Addressed in this way, noble Avalokiteshvara, the Bodhisattva Mahasattva said to Venerable Shariputra, O Shariputra, a son or daughter of noble family who wishes to practice the profound Prajnaparamita should see in this way, seeing the five skandhas to be empty of nature. Form is emptiness, emptiness also is form. Emptiness is no other than form, form is no other than emptiness. In the same way, feeling, perception, formation, and consciousness are emptiness. Thus, Shariputra, all dharmas are emptiness. There are no characteristics, there is no birth and no cessation. There is no impurity and no purity. There is no decrease and no increase. Therefore, Shariputra, in emptiness there is no form, no feeling, no perception, no formation, no consciousness, no eye, no ear, no nose, no tongue, no body, no mind, no appearance, no sound, no smell, no taste, no touch, no dharmas, no I, dhatu, up to, no mind, dhatu, no dhatu of dharmas, no mind consciousness, dhatu, no ignorance, no end of ignorance, up to no old age and death, no end of old age and death, no suffering, no origin of suffering, no cessation of suffering, no path, no wisdom, no attainment, and no non-attainment. Therefore, Shariputra, since the Bodhisattvas have no attainment, they abide by means of Prajnaparamita. Since there is no obscuration of mind, there is no fear, they transcend falsity and attain complete nirvana. All the Buddhas of the three times by means of Prajnaparamita fully awaken to unsurpassable, true, complete enlightenment. Therefore, the great mantra of Prajnaparamita, the mantra of great insight, the unsurpassed mantra, the unequaled mantra, the mantra that calms all suffering, should be known as truth, since there is no deception. The Prajnaparamita mantra is said in this way: Om Gate Gate Para Gate Para Samgate Bodhisvaha. The Shariputra, the Bodhisattva Mahasattva, should train in the profound Prajnaparamita. Then the Blessed One arose from that samadhi and praised noble Avalokiteshvara, the Bodhisattva Mahasattva, saying, Good, good, O son of noble family, thus it is, O son of noble family, thus it is. One should practice the profound Prajnaparamita, just as you have taught, and all the Tathagatas will rejoice when the Blessed One had said this. Venerable Shariputra and noble Avalokiteshvara, the Bodhisattva Mahasattva, that whole assembly and the world with its gods, humans, asuras, and Gandharvas rejoiced and praised the words of the Blessed One. Again, thank you all for being here. I'm delighted to be here. I'm delighted to be able to chat with you all about the Dharma. I want to begin by thanking Bakes for inviting me to do this course. Bakes, unfortunately, is not able to be with us tonight because he caught COVID.
Oh, geez.
He was down in the States visiting his grandkids, and on the way back, I think he got it. So he's quarantined for the moment. I also want to thank Siddhartha's Intent for including this in your program, and KCCL for hosting us. I hope you won't take this the wrong way. But the whole notion of contemplating reality is about our mistaken ways of relating with our own experience, which is known as samsara. The same experience related to differently is known as nirvana. So I think we all probably have some notion that there's enlightenment, which will get us from here to there, and it's like some special sauce or something else added to our perceptions so that we'll keep the same experience of reality that we currently have, only we'll get something better on top of it. Like we'll get to see new stuff that we haven't seen before. But the core issue is being mistaken about our current experience. The classical image that I think begins contemplating reality is what's called a rope snake. You're in a somewhat hard to see situation, like out in a garden at twilight, and there's a piece of striped rope on the ground. You're walking around, you see the striped rope, you mistake it for a snake. And it's not just a misperception visually, but then emotionally, there's all that goes with it. Most of us don't like to see snakes. Some do, but that's neither here nor there. You have, most of us would experience fear suddenly and have a reaction, do something about it, either run or whatever it is. So that illustrates our current condition, that we are misperceiving. Based on that misperception, all sorts of emotionality is arising or feelings, and based on that, we're acting. And pretty much our whole lives are based on this type of misperception.
Could you move the microphone a little bit closer? It's getting a lot of echo. Thank you so much.
So a lot of what we'll be talking about over the next 6 weeks is the illusory nature of our ordinary experience and how to transform that. And the methods that are presented by the Dharma are threefold. They're all about developing insight that sees correctly. And these are study, contemplation, and meditation within what we have understood from study and contemplation. And why does this make sense? It makes sense because we currently have a misperception, a wrong view of our experience. We're viewing it as though through the wrong end of the telescope. And to correct that, we need the right view, which is not to say that we're going to put on rose-colored glasses and see everything differently because of that, but we're going to work through a succession of methods to remove the mistakenness. So sometimes study and contemplation and meditation are called the three prajnas, or the three methods, three tools, prajna tools. I'm going to take a little sidetrack here and talk about a term that's often translated as philosophy. That all of this sometimes is presented as Buddhist philosophy, these views. But the Sanskrit term darshana is the term that really means view or insight or seeing, vision, understanding. It's not some intellectual exercise to prove a point or to come up with a logic or some conceptual understanding. View is always connected to contemplative practice of some sort in Buddhism. It's always some systematic thought to help us look into our own experience. Because even if we're talking about pillars and pots and tables and chairs, things that are often debated in Buddhist studies, we don't really have any concerns about how they're doing. What we're concerned about is correcting our own misapprehensions so that we can switch from samsaric mode to nirvanic mode. So sometimes this work with the view can be arduous. It can be extremely irritating because we have to use our intellects. We have to use systematic thought. And that's a lot of work. And many of us have come to Buddhism to get away from that kind of scholarship or philosophy or intellectualizing. And so we have started to practice meditation so that we could calm our minds and get rid of all this garbage. But that's probably not enough. It's really through working with the view and letting the view work through you that you can transform this mistaken way of perceiving, of experiencing, to a correct and liberating way of perceiving. The path we're going to go through over the next few weeks is presented in the Tibetan tradition. I think it comes from the late Indian tradition as well, as the stages of the view, the four schools. And this is a way of categorizing teachings so that you can see some progression into further and further subtlety, so that these are collections of methods that take us to more and more subtle versions of the correct view, till ultimately we abandon all views and just have clear seeing. Milarepa said, mind has even more projections than there are dust motes in the sun, which is a lot of projections. And anyone who's tried to meditate with formless meditation for more than 10 minutes probably is familiar with just how much mind can bring to the surface. Most of the time, most of it is subliminal. Most of it we don't notice. It's just our normal background activity. So much of the path is concerned with bringing that background to the surface so we can see just what's going on. So shining a light on that snake so that we can recognize its actual nature. Particularly today, there's so many concepts and so much call on intellect in this world that, first of all, we've all at least graduated from high school, and probably many have gone to college, some have postdocs and docs and everything else. We're highly intellectualized. Even if we're anti-intellectual, we have a lot of training, a lot of investment in our views. And intellect can be very useful and positive. It's a double-edged sword. Some of the things that appear in our minds allow us to manipulate the possibly material world in ways that are quite beneficial. Our lifespans today are roughly double what they were 100 years ago. And that's due to three main things: antibiotics, vaccines, and pasteurization. These have extended the average lifespan from about 40 years to about 80 years. All because of intellect, all because of things that appeared in people's minds, ways of thinking about the world. So intellect can be extremely positive and useful. Can also invent weapons of mass destruction, degradation of the environment, and so on. We're all quite familiar with the havoc that can be wrought by the intellect. But the important point here is that some of the things that appear in our minds can be highly functional, help us understand causes and conditions and manipulate them, sometimes in very positive ways. We've become so successful at this that some people have decided that that's all there is. All there is the material world. That even the mind must be a product of this material world, because we are so fascinated with our ability to manipulate it. So we're pretty good at using the intellect for some things. We're generally not so good at dealing with the emotional and feeling scape that appears to us. Generally, when strong emotions surface, we do the opposite of what we need to do to successfully work with them. We're really bad at recognizing what things are going to produce happiness and what things are going to produce suffering. And we are clueless when it comes to understanding the path to freedom from our bondage. But all of these things are appearing in our minds all the times. All these images, maps, projections, visualizations about the world, about our reality. We visualize how to make things, whether it's dinner or a child's birthday party or an automobile or an iPhone. All of this is appearing in our minds. Without it appearing in our minds, we wouldn't be able to make any of it. All of these emotional things are appearing in our minds. All of these desires and fears are appearing in our minds because some image, some visualization appeared. And we never get to the bottom of it because something appears to us and then we're off. We have the idea that such and such is going to make us happy, and we're hell-bent on pursuing that. We have the idea that this emotional thing that I'm experiencing, I have to get rid of, and we're off like that. We're going to fix it somehow. We have all these narratives about what's going on, as though what's going on is happening in the world out there, and we are in here trying to deal with it. But those narratives are really about what's happening in our own minds, what's appearing in our own minds, what we're projecting. They're always about our own experience that we're narrating. to ourselves. We structure our experience that way. We are conditioned that way. We're defined by these images, these visualizations, these narratives, and it's all our inner experience. So the purpose of the path is to reveal what's always been going on to us and free us from the karmic chain reactions that are being set off all the time by these mental events. So I feel like I've said a lot and would like to open it up at this point for some discussion.
Do I mention that online they can use the chat?
Please do. Should you mention it? I should mention it.
Please.
Yeah, so if you're out there in cyberspace and you have something you'd like to say or ask, please write it in the chat and Peter will read it out to us. And those of you in the room don't need to write it out in the chat. I can go on if no one has anything to say. Is this all old hat? Something you already know and you were coming for something different? You've heard it before.
I have heard. Don't know quite what to add to it at this point, but
Pretty clear.
Okay.
I hadn't heard the word darshan used very much before.
No, it's not very frequently used.
come back to an old question that I used to pester you with. We try to distinguish between external phenomena and internal phenomena to keep things clear. In the process of contemplating our way through the progressive stages of emptiness, are we in the end going to find that there is not really that sort of distinction?
Yeah. That's correct. Yeah, I mean, our conventional narrative is I'm in here, you're out there, and I'm talking to you. And that's from the perspective of our conventional view of how things are. And what we will find as we go through this succession of views is more and more questioning about, first of all, what's in here? Is there a me, a self? That's the big number one question that we start with. And then we start questioning what's out there, whether there are independent, lasting phenomena, and then we ultimately question whether there's any distinction between this and that.
And just to walk us through an example, so say, there's a dear friend who's really sick, and that's obviously happening outside of us, and we're having our reaction to that, and so can you just walk in terms of what's it, you're saying none of it's really outside of us, it's all.
Well, for there to be an inside and an outside, there has to be someone in here to be a reference point for someone out there. For there to be other, there has to start with self. And once we begin to question whether the self has any substantial existence, then that narrative starts to break down. So, sure, the sick friend is not inside of me, but neither am I. But obviously, we're fairly deeply habituated to thinking along those lines.
From online, excuse me. How can we be so good at manipulating phenomena and so clumsy at handling our emotions?
I think the answer is that the phenomena, which are seemingly physical or material, substantial, seem to be things that are viewed in common. So we can use the methods of science and create controlled situations for observing that allow us to make distinctions about those shared things and test these hypotheses and so on. We can't really do that with our own personal phenomena. We can't run independent investigations. They have to be very personal investigations. And there's a tremendous amount of opinion or prejudice against taking our internal phenomena seriously. For example, we say, oh, it's all in your mind. Actually, we usually say it's all in your head, which is even weirder. But when we say something's all in your head or all in your mind, what we mean is it's not significant, it's not meaningful. What's meaningful is what's out there, what's real, what I can observe. So there's a lot of prejudice against working directly with our emotional landscape, of respecting it, respecting its power, and developing methods that allow us to work with it in a healthy way. And, I think today there are people using Western paradigms that are starting to do some very healthy work with emotions. Starting with the MBSR and cognitive behavior therapy, things like that, which are helpful to people. But, in general, the mind is not respected in the materialist modern world.
Yeah, I have a comment and then a question. On the comment, is I'm really interested in the practice of contemplation. And the question after that is there something tricky about saying that intellect can help us go beyond intellect?
It's all we have to work with. If we can't use intellect to help us get beyond intellect, we're screwed. Even if you try to suppress your intellect, you have to use your intellect to do that. You have to think about not thinking. So, yeah, we've got to make use of this. And, you know, especially today when people have well-trained intellects, you know, we're not pastoralists herding sheep up in the mountains who might be able to just settle into our own minds in much more natural ways, because we have so much mental activity and just to survive, to function. So if we can't find ways to use the intellect to help overcome these views that are obstacles, to overcome the intellectual obstacles that we have, we're really in trouble. So, you know, contemplation is one of the key methods. Study is a key method, and that's not very fashionable in the Buddhist world. It tends to be like the nerds who go off and read Nagarjuna. But I think those of us who are ordinary practitioners, who are really interested, particularly Vajrayana practitioners, who want to really bring some power to our practice, need to do it within the view, the right view. If you have the profound view, then your practice becomes profound. If you don't have the profound view, if you take the self and phenomena to be true and real, then you're going to be trying to find somebody who looks like Vajrayogini to stick inside of you to transform you. Like, it's weird. But if you have the profound view, then these methods become super profound.
You mentioned going from samsaric to nirvana view. What about going beyond both?
Well, in this presentation, nirvanic view is going beyond both. We're not talking about some sort of heavenly situation. We're talking about recognizing the true nature of our current experience, and through that overcoming all of the seeds and phenomena of samsara. And then we don't end up anywhere. We don't end up in some place that's really nice. We just end up right here without the confusion and delusion and suffering of samsara.
You talked about the necessity to use the intellect, and would it be fair to say, or maybe I'm off here, but if you were talking about hearing and contemplating and meditating, do we perhaps engage the intellect more within the first two?
Sure.
And then when we're meditating, we sort of don't necessarily try to intellectualize that and more sort of let happen what's happening, touching what we're doing. Like, I don't know, is that fair to say?
Somewhat true. Certainly you have to use your intellect a lot when you're studying, just to understand the words and the meaning. When you contemplate, you're trying to figure stuff out. And then when you bring what you've understood into meditation practice, it's pointing to the dark corners of your experience that you haven't been looking at. So sometimes you need to remind yourself, oh, look at that corner. So yes, you still use the intellect when you're doing the Vipassana, but it might be in a very wordless way. But there's some sort of sense of direction that's coming out of what you've understood. So, for example, you're studying the selflessness of persons, the fact that the self is illusory. And you study all the reasons why that's said to be true. That it's made of, it's composite, it's made of all these different changing features and so on and so forth. And then you reflect on that, and you've understood the words, you've understood what the reasoning is, the logic of that, of selflessness. You might study the 20 peaks of the view of the self. And like you have to look at all those 20, like is the self the possessor, or is it the base, or there's a whole bunch of logics that go with that. And then you contemplate that. After you've learned what the logic is, you contemplate, does that make sense to me? Could it be a possessor? Could this self thing be a possessor? What does that mean? Could it be a base? Could it be a basis for my experience? You look, could it be identical with my experience? So you look at those logics and you reflect on them and you say, well, if that were the case, then blah, blah, blah. But then when you're practicing, you don't just drop it and say, oh, to hell with it, I'm gonna chill. You need to learn to settle the mind and then look at it. So there's an active looking aspect that looks to see if you can find a self based on what you have understood. That it would have to be one of these 20 relationships. And you might have to remind yourself of those relationships. But there's a balance that you develop between looking and resting. When you get too hyped up, you rest. When it gets nice and settled, you look again. So the intellect is involved in that.
Sort of guiding you, keeping that sort of middle point, what to do and what not to do.
Well, it's more like where to look. What is it I'm looking for? What am I looking at?
Yeah, I think that's certainly
So it's much less discursive than study or contemplation, but it's still using the sharpness of the mind. And it's directed. And it comes out of what you've already understood through study and contemplation.
You have another one? Too. And right as you're answering, I've had several requests online to pan the room so that people feel that they're part of a class. If you see me getting up and moving the camera around, that's why. So here's the question. Can you suggest how people might wake our questioning minds if we tend not to have words for questions that just below the surface of being able to verbalize them? I find this to be a very strong habit. In other words, how might we encourage more intellect in ourselves if we tend toward a more intuitive style?
Can you read the beginning of that again?
Beginning, it says, can you suggest how people might wake our questioning minds if we tend not to have words for questions that just below the surface of being able to verbalize them? I find this to be a very strong habit. In other words, how might we encourage more intellect in ourselves if we tend towards a more intuitive style?
Good question. I think that's where some study will be helpful. That sometimes you'll be studying something and struggling with it a bit, and it'll take over your dreams, and you'll find yourself thinking about it all different points in the day. That's really helpful. It should provoke you. And the types of things we'll talk about over the next few weeks are things that are very provocative. Not just the selflessness of persons, but whether there are 3 times or not, or what is the difference between a sense perception and a concept. Things that we think we know a lot about, but when we start to look into, you might find very provocative and make you wonder more about your experience. That hopefully, that's the point. The point of all of this class is to provoke inquisitiveness and face us in the right direction, looking in the right direction.
Can you give some suggestions or ideas on how you can maintain your understanding of the view? Like, for instance, you read something and you study it, might take a whole course on it, and you have a pretty clear understanding, and then your habitual patterns pop in a week later, and you're just seemingly thinking the way you always thought.
Yeah. Yeah, I've been at this for quite a while, and I have that experience a lot. I think you just have to keep coming back to it again and again. Just as it's really helpful to have a daily meditation practice and not just wait months and then sit a weekend, but to try to practice every day. It's good to read in a thematic way. So, we'll talk about these different bundles of techniques over the next 6 weeks. And you might find one of them particularly helpful for you. For example, the Sutra School. I love the Sutra School. This is one of the foundational vehicle schools, one of the Shrivaka schools. And I love it because they have this way of looking at experience that's quite profound. Even though it's one of the foundational vehicle schools, it's not the Mahayana, but they have a really cool way of kind of inserting a scalpel into reality. So, you could spend a year or 2 reflecting on that and using it as you sit sometimes. Say, okay, what is a generality? What is a particular? Or whatever terms we end up using for those. And what we're looking for in all of these methods are scalpels and pry bars and different tools to take apart our glued together realities so that they can start to percolate and ventilate and have some fresh insight. So I think that works for me, that, I kind of follow a theme for a while and try to have a regular meditation practice and don't forget about the theme. Don't just sit and go, okay. But, look and use the tools of that particular area that you're interested in to help point your looking. sometimes you can just use a verse from a teaching. Like for the last 6 months, there have been 2 verses that I use every time I sit, every day. So that's like literally hundreds of times I have sat and recited those verses to myself because they kind of point me in the right direction. And I can sit there for 10 minutes without it and I'll be just like, but when I remember the verse and look in that way, it's really helpful. It kind of snaps things into more focus. So, whatever it is that you find in studying and contemplating the view that is working for you for a while, because it'll work for a while and then it'll just stop working. You need to find something else because the mind, ego finds ways of deflecting things or getting bored with a method and it loses its potency. But there are lots of methods, fortunately. This is a real Swiss Army knife. This is not just like one and you're done. And that's what we need.
I've got a couple of requests to have an overview of this class, just to have so people have a sense of what to be going, and also pertaining to that, will we learn how to practice contemplation? And just a pointer for people here in the class, when you ask a question, if you could really speak up, because that microphone in front of Andy has to pick it up so that people online can hear, and they're all struggling to hear the questions. Thank you.
Sorry, and if I need to repeat the questions, remind me.
Okay.
Yeah, so an overview. I think what we will be doing is we will go into the methods that are used by the 4 schools as told in Contemplating Reality, which is very much the Tibetan way of thinking about this. I'll throw in some other material that I've become very intrigued with the last years about the early Indian way of looking at these traditions, because in some sense, the Tibetan thing got kind of complicated and there was a lot of scholarly debate and sometimes it lost traction in the practice world, like scholars do. And the early Indian stuff I find actually very helpful in presenting a clearer progression. So I'll throw in some of that as well. But the Tibetan approach is 4 schools that they believed existed in India, although there's little evidence for a couple of them. And they kind of miss one of the schools that actually did occur. So there's some questions about this. But the 4 schools, there are 2 foundational vehicle schools and 2 Mahayana schools. The foundational schools are the Vaibhashika, or the particularists, and the Sutrantikas, or Sutra school. And they have different methods of bisecting reality, and we'll go into each of those and we'll contemplate using those methods. And then the 2 Mahayana schools, according to the Tibetans, are the Chittamatra, or mind-only school, and the Madhyamaka, or middle way school. And then there's this funny thing that happens at the end of the Madhyamaka in some of the Tibetan schools, where you get this, what's they call the Great Madhyamaka, which is actually Yogacara. So I'm going to try not to get too nerdy about this. Thank you. I'm going to try not to impose too much of my reflections on this, and just try to use the stuff in Contemplating Reality, which follows the Tibetan tradition. But I can't help myself, so you're going to have to put up with a little confusion as we contrast these two different approaches. They're not so different, but they're different enough. So that's what we'll be covering over the course of the next 5 Monday nights. And hopefully I can remember to include enough contemplation practice together so it's not just me blabbing on and on. And then we'll have discussion of those things. Is that sufficient?
Yeah, that's great. Thank you so much.
Okay.
One more question?
Sure.
Just in a quick comment, last one said, please do get nerdy.
Well, not everyone is going to appreciate that, so I'm going to try to balance it.
And for everyone here's information, we have 44 people online.
Great.
Love
that.
Wow.
So last question from online. I find that the tests for something to exist, whether something is permanent, singular, etc., are a bit limited or circular, because of course the answer is that nothing is that way. Can we go beyond these tests' criteria and get to the same answer? A thought is not solid, but still seems to exist, even though it is impermanent, etc. Meaning, the definition of existence of phenomena seems tweaked to bring the desirable answer.
Well, sure. I think the point of all of that we will study is that as long as it remains in the realm of concept, we haven't gotten beyond our normal view. So Nagarjuna said, by means of the relative, we arrive at the ultimate. But we have to let go of the means at some point. So things like existence and non-existence are very central to our ways of viewing reality. As Nagarjuna said, existence is one extreme, non-existence is another extreme. The wise don't dwell in either. But to get there, we need tools. And one of the tools that we use a lot is things like these frameworks of existence. So there are a lot of frameworks that we need to use in order to point ourselves in the right direction, but then in order to have direct experience, we need to get beyond the tool. Well, let's sit for a couple of minutes, and then if there's nothing else, we can close. You decide.
Ooh, the power is mine.
Any parting shots?
There were 2 remaining questions. I don't know if you want to do
Sure.
it. All right. The first is, when you say the profound view, you mean wisdom?
I mean the profound view of luminous emptiness. Wisdom is what recognizes luminous emptiness.
And the last one, what is the role of devotion in contemplating reality?
Well, I was thinking about this earlier today, not about devotion, but about faith, because this is what we would consider to be the path of reason, as opposed to the path of faith. The path of faith, you do your practice, and within the practice, the view might develop. And the path of reason, you do the reasoning and study the view, and then the practice develops within that. But it did occur to me that without some faith that this makes sense and will be helpful to you, then you're not going to follow the path of reason very far. So I think you need some faith that maybe you need devotion to Nagarjuna and Asanga and Vasubandhu. But you have to have some faith that this is a path that is profound and meaningful and of great benefit. So.
Just a question about the book, Andy. Are there particular chapters that you're suggesting we read for each class, or how would you suggest we work with your book?
I didn't particularly want to tie it to chapters of the book. Then it becomes like, did you read the assignment?
Right.
So I'm going to assume that people have or haven't read things, and I'm going to just talk. So next time, you can probably tell where we are, because there's a chapter called Selflessness 101 coming up. So we'll talk about selflessness, and maybe we'll talk about Vaibhashika, maybe also Sutrantika next time, but I'm not promising. But that's roughly where we'll be in the book, if that's helpful. But there's no assignment, and if you don't want to read the book, you're still absolutely welcome. Hopefully it can be as entertaining as it would be if you had read it. Okay, we have a closing chant, which is the long life prayer for Sangso Kensei Rinpoche. Om Savasti, Skogalan Lotus Ruga, conqueror of Maya's deathless natural into great Vajra bliss, subjugator of apparent phenomena, please shower the blessings of immortality. Fearless Lord of speech, you are the Vajra holder of the profound secret treasures of wisdom and compassion. Victorious one of all pervading activity, may your true secrets remain indestructible and everlasting. As vowed by Vinla Mitra and King Trisam Detsun to constantly manifest their compassion, you came as a warrior to protect the doctrine and all beings in this dark age. May you remain forever as the unchanging Vajra essence. May the virtuous seed of this supplication, warmed and moistened by the unreceiving two truths, ripen into a splendid fruit that beautifies the three worlds with utmost auspiciousness.
Dedication of merit.
By this merit may all attain omniscience, may defeat the enemy, wrongdoing, from the stormy waves of birth, old age, sickness, and death, from the oceans of samsara, may I free all beings. By the confidence of the golden sun of the great east, may the lotus garden of Kritin's wisdom bloom. May the dark ignorance of sentient beings be dispelled. May all beings enjoy profound, brilliant glory. Thank you all very much.
Thank you.
And Peter, thank you for doing our internet.